Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. What would you do if you pulled into your driveway and found a landscaping crew building a luxury garden on land everyone thinks is communal but your deed says is yours? I didn't stop them. And that decision changed everything. Let me start by describing my property because it's basically the whole point of this story. I live at the end of a cul-de-sac in a subdivision that was developed back in the early 2000s. Because of the way the developer originally platted the land, my lot has this large, irregular extension on one side. It bows outward away from the cul-de-sac itself and covers a wide, flat, grassy area that runs along the road leading in. To anyone just driving past, it looks completely like common green space. There's no fence around it. It's just open, well-maintained grass sitting between the road and my tree line. But it is not common area. It is in my deed. It is on my survey. It is mine. I know it's mine because I'm the kind of person who actually reads closing documents all the way through. I have a filing cabinet in my home office where I keep hard copies of everything important. My mortgage paperwork, my deed, my title insurance policy. And most relevantly here, the official county surveyed plat map and the boundary survey that was completed when I bought the house. The survey shows iron pins buried in the ground at every corner of my lot. Those pins are still there. I located each one when I moved in, and I've checked them a couple of times since just because I'm the kind of person who likes knowing exactly where his property ends. That habit is about to pay off more than I ever expected. The neighborhood has an HOA. Of course it does. For the first couple years I lived there, it was a pretty low-drama operation. Reasonable dues, a newsletter here and there, the occasional passive-aggressive flyer about parking, normal stuff. Then the woman who had been quietly running the board for years stepped down, and the president position was taken over by a neighbor who lives about 4 houses down from me. I'm not going to spend a lot of words on her because this post would never end. What I will say is that she is the kind of person who treats any position of minor authority like she was handed the keys to a small country. She ran for the position on a platform of beautification and community pride, which sounds fine, but in practice it meant she wanted to spend dues money on whatever she personally found attractive and make the neighborhood a monument to her own taste. She also had this particular tone when she spoke to people, this quality where she always sounded like she was doing you a favor by continuing the conversation. The kind of person who says, "You're welcome," before you've had a chance to say anything at all. She'd been president for about a year and a half when this all went down. In that time, she'd raised dues twice, gotten into a genuine screaming match with a neighbor over their mailbox color, and proposed unsuccessfully because the rest of the board shot it down, spending $12,000 on decorative stone pillars at the neighborhood entrance. She had also, I would later learn, developed a fixation on winning a local community beautification award, which she apparently felt would validate everything she'd been doing. I travel fairly regularly for work, a few times a month, usually 2 to 4 days at a stretch. Last spring I had a 4-day work trip that wore me completely out. Long days, short nights, too much airport food. I pulled into my driveway on a Thursday evening, genuinely running on fumes. The first thing I heard before I even got out of the car was the sound of a small excavator running somewhere nearby. I figured it was a neighbor doing something with their yard. But as I got out of the car, the sound was too close. I walked around the side of my house. There were 3 men working in my side yard. One of them was running a trenching machine along the ground near the tree line. 2 others were setting flagstone along what was clearly a partially finished path, a curved S-shape that ran from near the street all the way back toward the trees. And already planted and staked in a neat row were 3 Japanese maple trees, mature ones, the kind that arrive on a flatbed with root balls the size of washing machines and cost more than some people's cars. They were already fully in the ground, staked and watered in. Beautiful, honestly. I stood there for a second just looking at them and thinking, what on earth is happening on my property right now? I walked over to the man standing with the clipboard, clearly the foreman. I introduced myself, told him I owned the lot, and asked what was going on. He was completely relaxed about it, just professional and straightforward. He explained his crew had been contracted for a landscaping installation and gestured at the work like that covered it. I asked who had hired him. He flipped back a page on his clipboard and showed me the work order. The contract was authorized and signed by the HOA president. The billing was listed to the HOA's master account. The total contract value was $15,400. I looked at the work order for a moment, then I looked at the trees, then I looked at the flagstone path, which was genuinely well done. Real cut stone, properly set, not the cheap stuff you buy at a home improvement store in little interlocking squares. The irrigation trenching they hadn't quite finished yet looked like a solid drip system. I asked the foreman if he could send me a copy of the work order. He pulled out his phone and texted me a photo of it right there. I thanked him and told him to carry on. Then I went inside and put the kettle on. I did not yell at those workers. I want to be clear about that. They had absolutely nothing to do with this situation. They showed up to a job, someone handed them a signed contract and a location, and they were doing exactly what they were being paid to do. But more than that, I had already done some fast mental math. The HOA had just spent $15,000 installing a professionally designed garden on my private property. If I stopped them mid-job, I'd be left with a partially torn-up yard and a complicated dispute about who owed what for work already completed. If I let them finish, I'd have a $15,000 garden. I drank my tea and watched through the side window while they finished up the irrigation trenching. I also went out twice, once before dark and once after with a flashlight, and took around 40 photos and 2 short videos. I documented the completed installation from multiple angles, the workers still on site, the stakes in the ground on the trees, and the work order text on my phone sitting next to the survey I'd gone to find in my filing cabinet. Then I slept extremely well. Over the next few days I did my homework. I pulled out the survey, went into the yard, and located the iron boundary pins at the corners of that section of my lot. Every single thing that had been installed, the trees, the path, the irrigation system, sat entirely within my lot lines, not close to the line, not on the line, completely inside my property by a meaningful margin. I also pulled up the county assessor's parcel records online, which are public, and cross-referenced them with my deed. Everything confirmed what I already knew. Then I looked more carefully at the irrigation system. What I found was that whoever had designed the installation had tapped it into my exterior water supply line, my spigot, my meter. Every time that irrigation system ran, I was paying the water bill for it. I took photos of the connection point and made a note to address it. The monthly HOA board meeting was about a week after the landscaping was finished. I usually only attend these a few times a year when something on the agenda actually affects me. This time I went deliberately. I brought my property survey in the cardboard tube I keep it rolled in, tucked it under my arm, and took a seat near the back. The meeting ran through the usual business for the first 20 minutes. Budget line items, a complaint about someone's trash bin sitting out too long, upcoming maintenance schedule for the actual common areas. Then the HOA president said she had an announcement about a personal initiative she was excited to share. What came next was something to behold. She stood up and delivered what I can only describe as a small, prepared speech about how she'd identified the barren and underutilized green space adjacent to my address and taken decisive action to have it professionally landscaped as part of a nomination she was putting together for the local beautification award. She talked about the Japanese maple varieties by their horticultural names, clearly having done some reading. She described the flagstone path, the irrigation, the multi-season visual interest, the community pride, the property value uplift. A few people in the room were nodding politely. She was visibly proud of herself in a way that was almost uncomfortable to watch. Then she looked at me, because obviously the landscaping was right next to my house, and she clearly expected some gratitude, and she said something to the effect that I should consider myself lucky to have such a lovely view from my side window, though I shouldn't get confused and think the path was mine to use privately since it was an amenity for the whole community. The room was quiet. I said very calmly that I had a question about that. I pulled the cardboard tube out from under my arm and unrolled the survey on the table in front of me. I turned it so the board members closest to me could see it. I explained that according to the official county stamped property survey and my recorded deed, the area where the landscaping had been installed was not common area. It was my private lot. I had the boundary pins in the ground confirming the lines. I also had a copy of the work order the foreman had texted me, which I had printed and brought along. I set that on the table next to the survey. I said all of this at a normal volume. I didn't make a production of it, I just said it. The HOA president's expression did something interesting. It went from smug to blank in about 2 seconds, like her face was waiting for new instructions that weren't coming. One of the other board members leaned over and actually examined my survey. He asked me twice if I was certain. I said yes both times. I explained that the lot appears to be open green space because it's irregularly shaped and unfenced, but it had been part of my parcel since the original development. Anyone could verify it by checking the county GIS parcel viewer, which was free and public. She recovered enough to insist I was wrong and that the area was obviously common area because it didn't look like someone's private yard. I suggested she compare the county parcel map to my survey side by side because they would match exactly. Two of the board members already had their phones out doing precisely that. The room shifted. What followed was not a clean confrontation. It was messier and more uncomfortable than that. She cycled through several positions in quick succession. First, I was wrong. Then, even if I was technically correct, the HOA had implicit authority over neighborhood aesthetics. Then the landscaping was essentially a gift to me and I should be grateful for it. Then she landed finally on what was clearly her real concern, which was that if this became widely known, it was going to reflect very badly on her. She asked me to stay after the meeting. She said we could work something out quietly. I said sure. After everyone else filed out, she asked me to agree to let the landscaping crew come back the following morning to dig up the trees and remove the flagstones so they could reinstall everything in the actual common area across the street. She'd handle all the coordination herself, she said. Nobody needed to make a big deal of it. She framed this as a reasonable solution and looked at me like I should be nodding along. I told her I wasn't going to allow that. She stared at me. She asked why not. I explained as plainly as I could that once plants and trees are installed and rooted in the ground on private property, they become fixtures of that land. Legally, they attach to the property. The moment those maples went into my soil, they became mine. The flagstone set directly into the ground, same thing. You can't unilaterally come dig up someone's property. Removing those trees and stones without my consent would constitute destruction of private property, and anyone entering my lot to attempt it without permission would be trespassing. I mentioned that I'd already had a brief conversation with a real estate attorney to confirm I had this right. She told me I was being completely unreasonable. I told her I understood she saw it that way and went home. The next morning, I sent a formal written notice to the HOA's registered address by certified mail. It stated clearly that I was asserting ownership over all landscaping installed on my property, that no person had permission to access my lot to remove or alter any of it, and that any unauthorized entry for that purpose would result in law enforcement being called and potential civil action. I kept it short and factual. My attorney friend reviewed it before I sent it. Then I dealt with the water line situation. I drafted a second letter to the HOA documenting the unauthorized connection to my water supply, attaching photos of the tap point and a comparison of my water usage versus the same period the previous year. I included a bill for the water used to date. More importantly, I demanded the HOA hire a licensed plumber at HOA expense to disconnect the irrigation system from my water line and properly cap it off. That letter also went out certified mail. After that, I sat down and wrote a letter to my neighbors. Not an angry letter, just a factual one. It explained what had happened in plain terms. The HOA had spent $15,000 of resident dues on a landscaping project that was installed entirely on my private property because nobody checked the property boundaries before signing the contract. I attached a copy of the landscaping company's invoice and the relevant portion of my survey. I said that if anyone had questions about how their dues were being spent, they should bring those questions to the HOA board. I printed one for every household on my street and delivered them during an afternoon walk. By the following morning, I had texts from neighbors I had never spoken to in the years I'd lived there. Most were asking questions. A lot of them were not happy. One neighbor who had attended the HOA meeting told me later that the president had spent that same afternoon going door to door trying to frame the whole thing as a disputed boundary and suggesting that I was the difficult party. But people were already looking up the county parcel viewer themselves. The boundary is public record. It is what it is. An emergency HOA meeting was called about a week and a half later. I didn't call it. The residents did. Enough homeowners signed a petition to force it onto the agenda. I attended again, same seat in the back. The HOA president opened by framing the situation as an honest mistake she had acted on in good faith, the kind of thing that could happen to anyone given how the property looked. She floated the idea that the HOA might be able to recoup some costs if I agreed to certain community access terms for the path. She was visibly nervous in a way she'd never been at a regular meeting. Her talking points kept looping. Then one of the other board members read aloud from the HOA's own governing documents. The relevant section was on capital expenditures, and it was very clear. Any expenditure over $5,000 required a full board vote before funds could be committed. The landscaping project had cost $15,000 and had been approved by one person without a vote. That was a separate violation from the property boundary issue entirely, and it meant the decision hadn't been just a mistake. It had been procedurally improper from the start. The room was not with her after that. People asked direct questions about what the fix would cost, whether dues were going up, who was accountable. She didn't have answers that satisfied anyone. The landscaping company had a valid signed contract and was owed the full amount regardless of the boundary error, which meant the money was simply gone. The HOA was also on the hook for the plumber. Nobody was getting made whole. The vote to remove her from the board was not close. She left the meeting before it formally adjourned. The landscaping company was paid by the HOA over the following months, which required dipping into the reserve fund in a way the new board was not pleased about. The plumber came out about 3 weeks after I sent the letter, disconnected the irrigation tap from my water line, capped my side cleanly, and submitted his invoice to the HOA. I paid nothing. My side yard is genuinely beautiful now. The Japanese maples came in strong through the spring. The variety they chose has deep red-purple leaves, and in the afternoon light it's the best thing to look at in the entire yard. The flagstone path runs from the edge of my driveway all the way to the back of the lot where I put a bench that I bought myself. I added a couple of large planters and a string of solar lights along the path, nothing expensive, just enough to make it feel intentional. Which it is. All of it is mine. The former HOA president put her house on the market about 3 months after the emergency meeting. I don't know her reasons and I didn't ask. The house sold in about 5 weeks. I watched the moving truck from my living room window on a Tuesday morning while I had my coffee. The neighborhood has been genuinely quiet ever since. The new board is boring in exactly the right way. They hold votes before spending money. They send emails. It's like living in a normal place. I'm writing this from the bench at the back of my yard. The largest of the 3 maples has grown enough over the summer that it throws a decent patch of shade right over where I'm sitting. The whole thing cost me absolutely nothing. I kept my documents organized, I let a crew finish their work, and I sent some certified letters. Sometimes the grass really is greener on your side of the property line, especially when someone else pays to plant it. The next one is a malicious compliance story. So I work as a courier for a local furniture and hardware supplier. Most of the time it is pretty chill, but occasionally you get that one customer who thinks being a jerk is a personality trait. Last Thursday I had a delivery for a guy who ordered a bunch of heavy outdoor decking material. The address on the invoice was for an old industrial park on the edge of town that is mostly abandoned warehouses and empty lots. I called him when I was about 10 minutes out just to confirm where exactly he wanted the pallet dropped because the GPS was pointing to a literally gated-off gravel pit. The second he picked up, he started screaming. He told me that I am paid to drive, not to ask stupid questions, and that the address in the system is there for a reason. I tried to explain that it looks like a construction site or an old dump, but he cut me off and said he is a busy man and doesn't have time to hold my hand. He literally told me, and I quote, "Just put it exactly where the paperwork says and stop bothering me or I will call your manager." Alright then. I am a man of my word. I drove to the exact coordinates on the shipping manifest. It was a rusted gate in front of a completely empty dirt lot with a sign that said private property, keep out. There was nobody there and no building in sight. I checked my paperwork again and the address was 100% correct according to the system. I unloaded the entire pallet of high-end cedar decking right there in the dirt, leaned it against the fence and took a photo for the delivery confirmation. About 3 hours later, my boss calls me into the office. Apparently the guy meant to put in his home address, which was on the other side of the city, but he had used his old business billing address by mistake. He was livid because when he finally drove out there to check, most of the wood had already been picked over by people driving by or was just sitting in the mud. He tried to claim I should have known it was a mistake. My boss just pulled up the recorded call where the guy told me to stop asking questions and put it exactly where the paperwork said. The guy had to pay for a whole new order because he signed off on the delivery terms. He didn't say a word when I saw him at the warehouse later to pick up the new stuff himself. The next one is an entitled people story. I, 40s F, have been best friends with Bianca, 40s F, for over 20 years. I have always been the one to help her through breakups, hard family issues. I even drove her everywhere, including the job I got for her when she was fired from a prior job. We met because we worked together and she had an abusive boyfriend at the time and we started having lunches together and I started driving her home from work when her and BF at the time fought. She also lived with me rent-free. no money of any kind, including for utilities and food, etc., for over 2 years when another boyfriend dumped her and she couldn't afford her rent anymore when he stopped paying his portion. My husband and I welcomed her into our home, cooked for her, listened to her vent, and were just overall supportive friends. I've always been the one who supports her, emotionally, practically, financially when needed. It's never been reciprocal, and she hasn't thanked me or shown any appreciation for my efforts in decades, but I guess I just got used to it. Recently, her sister died of an overdose after a long battle with addiction, and it was horrible and sad. I now live in another state, so I took off a week from work and drove to stay with Bianca for a week to help her through the immediate aftermath and set up the GoFundMe to help with costs, as well as helped her with the whole funeral process and navigating difficult family issues, the 2 days of funeral and wake, and giving her money to help with costs. I stayed the rest of the week to help her just grieve. She was not close at all with her sister and constantly criticized her and was really mean to her when she was alive. But it was still her sister, and I know she had some guilt and regret for criticizing her sister's struggles without helping her. An important side note to mention, 4 months earlier I had lost a very dear friend after a 4 or 5 year battle with cancer that absolutely destroyed me. Bianca knew this friend as well, and they got along well, but never offered any support during the time he was sick or when he passed away, and I did ask for support but was always dismissed with, well, everyone has problems, or a vague, that's sad, but nothing of any substance or care. When I texted Bianca to check in on how she was doing after I got home from her sister's funeral and wake, she started replying with one-word answers or annoyed responses. I asked her how she was holding up and if I can do anything to ease her burden, and she replied coldly, saying she has a lot to handle when it's an actual sibling that has died, implying my loss wasn't as valid, which was the final straw that broke me. My friend I lost to cancer was one of my closest childhood friends, and I loved him deeply. I could not get past that comment. It was like someone had slapped me when I read it. I was the first one she called when her sister died and immediately dropped everything to be there for her. She's also been jealous and dismissive whenever I shared good news in the past. Long before her sister's death and that slap in the face from her text starting putting all the pieces together in my mind of just how toxic and one-sided our friendship has been for a while. She planned a memorial for her sister to be held on late sister's birthday a few months after the funeral. I was going to drive 6 hours to attend, but her texts made me feel unwelcome and felt hostile. She never asked how I was, never acknowledged my own grief when I lost someone I loved, and while she was claiming to grieve, all she talked about were her upcoming vacation plans. She has a habit of lashing out at people she thinks will stick around, and she calls me her sister. So I am one of those people she apparently thinks lashing out at is okay because I'll always be there. Anytime I tried to help her with getting items or vendors for the memorial, I was always dismissed, or she just got annoyed like I was a nuisance instead of her BFF of 20 plus years. I have always made excuses for her behavior because I thought she had a bad home life growing up and a lot of trauma, so I will wholeheartedly admit that I enabled her and overlooked the bad stuff a lot in the past. I decided not to go to the memorial. Instead, I spent time with supportive friends and got a small tattoo to symbolize my own renewal and to honor my friend that recently died. Bianca never texted to ask where I was or why I didn't come to the memorial. I was supposed to be on a 6-hour drive to attend, and she never once asked where I was or checked in at all. She never reached out afterwards either. Since then, she has posted multiple passive-aggressive memes online about fake people, narcissists, one-sided relationships, and never being the bigger person again, directed at me. I've ignored them and blocked her. Talking to her about issues has never worked and always ends in her crying and being the victim, and I don't have the bandwidth right now to go there. I realize that may be avoidant, but nothing she says will make the fracture in our friendship okay, as her comment about my friend's death feels overtly cruel, and that is not something I will tolerate in my life. I feel free, like a weight has lifted and a lifetime of handling her drama is gone. But part of me still wonders, am I the a-hole for not showing up to the memorial and ending a 20-year friendship without explanation, knowing she has lost her sister and has an unsupportive family? Or was I simply setting a boundary and protecting my own peace? The next one is an entitled parent story. Hi, I'm a 31-year-old woman and I've spent 28 years of my life living with my parents, both of whom have classic narcissistic personalities. For the first 26 years, I didn't even know that what I was experiencing was abuse. I thought it was normal being blamed for everything, constantly criticized, emotionally crushed, and made to feel like I was the problem. I was anxious, depressed, and lost. Then, around age 26, I stumbled upon the concept of narcissistic abuse online, and suddenly, everything clicked. That was the turning point. From there, I began my healing journey learning about boundaries, gray rocking, detachment, rebuilding confidence, and working on my inner self. I was proud of the progress I was making, even while still living with them for a couple more years. I minimized contact, stayed emotionally distant, and truly began to reclaim my sense of self. Then, at 28, I met my now husband. Initially, things seemed great. Before marriage, I was honest with him. I told him everything about my past, my triggers, and how I grew up in a highly toxic home. He seemed accepting and understanding at the time, and I thought, finally, someone who gets it. But that supposed acceptance turned out to be indifference. He didn't really care, he just wanted to get married. From literally the second day of our marriage, his emotional absence was shocking. No connection, no effort, no communication, nothing. I was constantly the one initiating conversations, planning dates, trying to make things work, while he treated me like I was asking for too much just by wanting his time or affection. And that wasn't even the worst of it. He made terrible financial decisions, took loans to repay other loans, and his business crashed. He never took accountability or felt remorse. Eventually, he even started stealing my gold jewelry to pay off debts. I found out that he'd taken multiple loans under my name, I don't even know how many. I was devastated. Meanwhile, my parents found out about the financial mess because some bank representatives showed up at their house. Now they're suddenly concerned and want to intervene, talk to my husband's relatives, help me, and fix things. But here's the thing, I know their pattern. They've always needed a supply. When I was younger, I was the scapegoat, and my younger sister was the golden child. They used to abuse and manipulate my father's side of the family until that family completely cut them off. Then they turned to me. When I got married and left home, they turned to my sister, who eventually became depressed and had to move out to another city for her own sanity. Now that my sister is gone, they have no one left, no supply. And I'm convinced they're looking to pull me back in to use my marital issues as a convenient excuse to re-enter my life and regain control. And honestly, this thought makes my blood boil. Because I know what's coming. They'll act concerned, pretend to help, manipulate everyone involved, and before I know it, I'll be trapped again, emotionally destroyed, back in their house, back in that toxic dynamic. Lately, I've been feeling this uncontrollable urge to tell them everything to their face, to call them out, to tell them exactly what kind of parents they've been, to expose their motives, and to finally say, I see through you now, and I'm not falling for this again. I've held back my entire life because it was never physically safe to speak up. My father used to verbally abuse me for hours, standing in front of me for 2 to 3 hours, hurling the most degrading insults and sometimes getting physically violent. But now, I live far away, thousands of kilometers away, and I'm physically safe for the first time. So, I want to ask, is it worth it to confront narcissistic parents once and for all? Should I tell them what I know and let out everything that's been boiling inside me? Or should I stay silent and protect my peace, knowing that confronting them will only feed their need for drama and control? Part of me wants to show them that I see through every move they make, that I'm no longer the scared little girl they used to break down. Also, there's another layer. If they start interfering in my marriage, my husband might finally see that he can't take me for granted anymore. But that could come at a heavy cost too, because they can destroy lives and relationships when they want to. I'm torn between finally standing up for myself and protecting my peace. Any advice, strategies, or even shared experiences would mean the world to me. Anyway, thank you for watching.